Imagine the same Tony Beets, the king of the Klondike of the gold rush, and his own son, Kevin, delivered a blow that shook the entire camp. This time, the story is different. Because Kevin himself pulled out gold in front of Tony, the value of which would blow anyone's mind. A whopping $45 million worth of gold, right from under his nose. The entire plot unfolds like a movie. Tony was confident he had the best claim, but Kevin remained calm and made a move that stunned everyone. The cameras kept rolling. Tony's face slowly changed. And when Kevin's team pulled out the gold flake, everyone was stunned. No one could say, "Did this really happen?" The question now is, did Kevin defeat his own father? Or was this part of a larger plan? Fans have gone crazy on social media. Some are saying Tony's time is up, while others are saying Kevin Beets will become the new Gold King. The video captures the entire scene, the drama, the emotions, and the moment when gold first appears. The twist in this episode will keep you glued to the screen until the very end. So don't forget to watch the full video. Like if you found Kevin's move clever, tell us in the comments who your favorite is between Tony versus Kevin, and hit subscribe. Because the next Gold Rush battle is about to get even crazier. The name Tony Beets brings to mind the same thing for every Gold Rush fan: strength, experience, and the passion that makes a fortune by extracting gold from the soil. For years, Tony ruled the cold, dangerous, and difficult terrain of the Yukon. He not only single-handedly extracted millions of dollars worth of gold, but also made himself a living legend. People call him the King of the Klondike because he earned both fame and respect through hard work. He's a man who's never afraid to take risks. Whether the river dries up or the machines break down, Tony always fights. His voice, his anger, and his determination are what set him apart from other miners. Tony's mining philosophy is clear: do it or go home. For him, work isn't just a way to earn money, but a passion. He raised his family with this philosophy, ensuring that the Beets name shines for generations to come. But as the years passed, differences began to emerge between Tony's thinking and that of the new generation. While Tony followed the old ways, his son, Kevin, wanted to see things from a new perspective. For Tony, mining was a tradition, but for Kevin, it had become a science. This conflict was to be the beginning of a storm to come. Now, let's talk about Kevin Beets, the boy who always lived in his father's shadow. Yet the fire of creating a distinct identity burned within him. Kevin is a miner who speaks little, but when he does, he commands attention. From childhood, he watched his father extract gold, heard the machines run, and understood that mining is not just a game of strength, but also of the mind. Tony was always in the forefront, with cameras focused on him, while Kevin simply stood in the background. But deep down, he knew that one day he would have to make his own time. Kevin's approach is completely different from his father's. While Tony makes decisions with anger and passion, Kevin carefully considers every step. He relies on modern equipment, mapping technology, and precision mining. For Tony, digging means luck, but for Kevin, digging means calculation. He understood the logic behind every machine, read the pattern of every soil layer, and calculated every risk. Tony found all this fancy, but Kevin knew that times had changed. No longer the old ways, only new thinking could win in the gold rush. Tony always wanted his son to carry on his legacy, but he couldn't imagine that Kevin might want to rewrite that legacy in a new way. For Tony, the Beets family name was a source of pride, while for Kevin, that same name had become a liability. He didn't want to overshadow his father, but simply wanted to prove that he was just as capable, or perhaps even more so. Tony never openly praised him, and this feeling grew like a silent storm within Kevin. Tony's personality is like a volcano, loud, unpredictable, and always ready to erupt. Meanwhile, Kevin is like a silent storm. It moves slowly, but when it arrives, it shakes everything. This contrast between the two was to become the biggest drama in the world of the gold rush. On one side was experience and domination, and on the other, intelligence and innovation. Tony thought the world still functioned the same way it did 20 years ago, but Kevin proved that those who don't change with the times will be left behind. This was the moment where the story took a new turn. This battle between father and son wasn't just for gold, but also for honor and recognition. Tony was confident that he would remain the king of the Klondike, but Kevin possessed the courage that could topple kings. He knew that if he truly wanted to carry on the Beets legacy, he would have to break the old rules and forge his own path. This was the moment when Kevin decided it was time to step out of his father's shadow and shine. This new season of Gold Rush began as usual. Cameras, the sound of machinery, and Tony Beets' explosive entrance. But this time, there was something different in the air. Tony's face held the same confidence as always. He had already decided in his mind which land to start working on, where to dig, and where the next few $1 million worth of gold would be found. But Kevin had other ideas this time. He felt there was nothing left in the old claims. He said to Tony, "Dad, we should try a new place. There might be something big there." Tony immediately replied, "I've been on this land for 30 years. I know where the gold is." This is where the conflict between the two began. A battle between old experience and new thinking. Tony relied on his old methods. He believed that gold would be found where it had been found before, just hard work. But Kevin's mind was thinking scientifically. He had discovered many new sites using satellite data, soil density maps, and ground moisture levels. He was convinced that there were still untouched spots deep within the Yukon. But to Tony, all this was fancy nonsense. He said, "Gold mining isn't done by numbers, it's by instincts." Kevin remained silent, but he was determined to prove his point this time, no matter what it took. This was the moment when the distance between them grew. Gradually, this tension began to be felt in the camp. Word among the crew was that something was going on between Kevin and Tony. Tony mostly stayed at the old site, while Kevin focused on maps and computer readings. In the evenings, while the rest of the team ate dinner, Kevin would still zoom in on his laptop and look at satellite images. In his room, soil samples, charts, and notebooks were spread out on the table. He was studying the same spot over and over again, an area where no one had excavated before, but the data showed signs of gold veins. One night, Kevin went to the site alone. A cool breeze was blowing, the stars were clearly visible in the sky, and he had a portable scanner in his hand. He took a small sample of soil and looked. The readings were even more promising than expected. Right then, he decided, this is the place. For the next few days, he didn't tell anyone. He simply took 2 trusted men and quietly began planning the excavation. He started digging in small sections so Tony wouldn't notice. Kevin knew that if Tony found out, he would immediately stop. So he kept everything secret. The machines would be sent in at night. Work would begin in the first ray of morning light and be finished by noon. His men also knew that the work was being carried out solely on Kevin's trust. He wasn't lying to Tony, but he wasn't telling the truth either. This was the gray zone, where the greatest gold rush stories were born. Tony slowly began to sense something was wrong. He noticed that some excavators and fuel drums were missing. When he asked, no one answered directly. Kevin calmly replied, "Just some maintenance." But Tony sensed something was on his son's mind. His anger began to rise in the camp. He knew Kevin was hiding something, but he had no idea how drastic a step he was about to take. On the other hand, Kevin's hard work was paying off. The soil in his test pits was changing color. Scanner readings were increasing, and the excitement on the team's faces was clearly visible. This place was slowly becoming the biggest gamble of his life. He knew that if this venture succeeded, he would prove not only to his father, but to the entire mining world that new thinking is no less than old experience. But if it failed, Tony would always say, "I told you, son, the old way was right." Tony Beets isn't usually afraid of anything. He's the man who has dug up millions in gold by tearing through the icy Yukon with his bare hands. But this time, something was making him uneasy. He began to feel something was amiss at the camp. He noticed that some excavators and fuel barrels were suddenly missing. The sound of the machines had been coming from a different location for a few days. He observes everything with his own eyes, and this time he sensed that his son, Kevin, had other intentions. His face held his usual confidence, but a spark of suspicion slowly began to ignite within him. He questioned the crew. "Where is that D10 machine? And who removed that new pump?" Everyone's answers were vague. Tony understood that someone was hiding something from him, and that someone could be his own son. Tony decided to inspect the site himself the next day. The anger was clearly visible on his face. Every worker tried to avoid him because everyone knew Tony was angry, and no one wanted to answer. He checked the machine's logbooks, checked the fuel records, and noticed some entries were wrong. Kevin's name wasn't mentioned directly, but everything pointed to him. Tony whispered, "That kid's up to something." And that's when the real suspense began. The cold Yukon air no longer carried just the hum of machines, but the sound of an approaching storm. On the other hand, Kevin's secret site was now fully active. Seen from a drone shot, the place looked absolutely cinematic. A deep, muddy pit in the middle, machines all around, and workers working tirelessly. In the morning, the excavators would start at full speed, and by nightfall, the entire land would transform into a new shape. No pauses, no breaks, just non-stop digging. Kevin had planned every detail. He had built temporary walls around the site so that, from the outside, it would appear normal. His team consisted of just a few people, but everyone knew they were playing the biggest gamble in Gold Rush history. Kevin stood on the ground, carefully observing every scoop, every layer, every sound. His face was calm, but adrenaline was surging inside. Every time the excavator's bucket rose from the soil, he watched it intently, as if waiting for a moment. One of his team members laughed and said, "Kevin, if something comes up here, Tony will kill us." Kevin simply smiled and said, "Let's find something first." Behind that laughter was a tremendous tension, because everyone knew that if this went wrong, Tony's anger would make history. Then came the moment that changed everything. One morning, as the excavator dug deeper, the color of the soil changed slightly. As the bucket lifted a new layer, something shone in it. Kevin's attention immediately went to that spot. He removed the soil with his hand, and as the sunlight fell on it, a faint golden glow appeared. At that moment, the entire site fell silent. Kevin's hands shook slightly, and he looked at a nearby worker and said, "Guys, I think we just hit something big." Hearing those words made everyone's heart race. No one was laughing. No one was talking. Just that sparkle had settled in everyone's eyes. Kevin immediately signaled to stop the excavation. He picked up the sample, cleaned it, and saw it wasn't just glitter, it was real gold. Something big was hidden beneath the soil, perhaps a massive gold vein or an old deposit. The team's faces lit up with joy, but Kevin still had the same calm expression. He knew this was just the beginning. He still had to get to the real thing. At that very moment, Tony was starting his truck in camp. He was now completely convinced that Kevin had hit something big. His gut feeling had never deceived him, and it wouldn't this time either. He headed straight for the North Ridge, the very spot where the sound of the machines came from. Meanwhile, Kevin's team was placing ropes around the site to prevent outsiders from reaching it. Two different stories now rippled through the cold Yukon air. A father who had set out to uncover the truth, and a son who had begun to write history. The golden glint in the excavator's bucket wasn't just gold. It was the beginning of a storm that would shake the entire Beets family. Kevin's team was still digging. Dirt and excitement billowed in the air. Everyone stared at the glistening ground where something huge lay buried. Then came a distant sound, the rumble of a heavy engine. Everyone looked up simultaneously. Tony Beets' truck, kicking up red dust, was heading straight for the site. Kevin's face turned a little pale, but he composed himself. As soon as the truck stopped, the entire scene went completely silent. Only the sound of the engine shutting down, and then silence. Not a single worker moved. Tony got off the truck, his eyes filled with both anger and disbelief. He looked around, digging deep into the soil, machines running, and his son, Kevin, standing in the middle, holding a gold sample. In that moment, even the wind stopped, and the entire atmosphere seemed like a cinematic freeze. Tony slowly walked towards Kevin. The sound of his footsteps was now the soundtrack of the place. Even the crew behind the camera held their breath. Tony came closer, looked at the ground, then looked into Kevin's eyes and said, "So, this is what you've been hiding from me?" Kevin was silent for a moment, then answered simply, "Yes, Dad, and you needed to see this yourself." There was fire in both their eyes, but their fires were different. Tony's was fueled by ego, Kevin's by courage. This father versus son face-off wasn't just a family feud. It was the climax of the Yukon's biggest mining battle. Before Tony could say anything, the excavator's bucket removed another layer of soil. And in that instant, everything changed. What emerged from beneath was something no one had imagined. As the dust cleared, a long golden line shimmered from beneath the ground. A worker on Kevin's team yelled, "Oh my God, it's gold! It's all gold!" And indeed, it wasn't a small patch. It was an entire gold vein, extending beneath the soil. When the sun's rays hit it, the entire pit was bathed in golden light. Tony stood there for a few seconds, motionless. His eyes were fixed on that gold streak. Kevin slowly said, "Dad, it's real. $45 million worth of gold, right under your nose." After that line, the camera zoomed in on Tony's face. Disbelief, shock, and a moment of silence. Tony's face was unreadable. He seemed to be battling a storm within himself. On one hand, his pride, and on the other, his son's victory. The camera captured his reactions in slow motion. Mud falling from his shoes, the veins on his hands bulging, and the old fire in his eyes slowly dying. Kevin stepped forward and examined the area carefully, the gold shining clearly in his hands. The rest of the crew jumped for joy, but Kevin remained calm. He knew that the moment unfolding was not just about victory, but also about confrontation. Tony said softly, "You went behind my back for this?" Kevin replied in a calm voice, "No, Dad. I went beyond your limits." This line struck him straight to the heart. Tony clenched his fists in anger, but Kevin didn't give up. It was a moment where two generations met, one that continued to win with the old ways, and the other that forged new paths. For Tony, it wasn't just gold. It was a blow to his ego. For Kevin, it wasn't just success. It was his identity. There was a heaviness in the air, but a peace within Kevin. He looked into his father's eyes and said, "I didn't steal your glory, Dad. I earned it." This one line changed the entire atmosphere. Tony's lips trembled slightly, but he didn't say anything. Tony simply looked back at the gold one last time and walked toward the truck. His steps were heavy, and his anger lingered in the air. Kevin stood there, hands in the dirt, watching the gold shine. The crew watched that moment in complete slow motion, as if time had stopped. This wasn't just a gold discovery. It was a shift in power. For the first time in Yukon history, Tony Beets' legacy had been shaken, and Kevin Beets had written his own name in gold. As soon as that episode of Gold Rush aired on TV and social media, the entire world was shaken. Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube were buzzing with one thing: Kevin vs. Tony and etched Gold Rush drama. People couldn't believe that Tony Beets, who had been considered the king of mining for years, had been defeated by his own son. Some praised Kevin, writing, "Finally, the new generation took over." While Tony's fans still defended him, experience never loses. It just steps back. The entire internet was divided into two parts: those who considered Kevin the new king of the Klondike, and those who said Tony is still the real boss. Millions of comments poured in on the official Gold Rush page. Some viewers wrote that this was history in the making, while others said Tony deserved better. Memes also spread. One read, "Tony's face when Kevin pulled 45 milliliters right under his nose," and Tony's shocked expression underneath it went viral. Every mining forum, every discussion board was abuzz with the same debate. Is this the end of Tony or the beginning of Kevin? The show's ratings skyrocketed. Fans rewound the dramatic father-son clash over and over. Everyone knew this wasn't just a gold strike, it was a power shift. A new chapter had opened in the world of the Gold Rush. On the other side, Tony Beets sat alone in a corner of the camp. In front of him was the old coffee mug he used every morning, but today it tasted different. The hum of machines could be heard in the distance, but Tony's attention was elsewhere. He stared at the soil, the same soil that had made him a millionaire, and now the same soil that had brought him down. Old memories flashed through his mind. The first time he dug, the first time he found gold, the time Kevin tried to operate his machine as a child. Now that same son was standing against him, and he had won. Tony took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "Maybe it's time." He looked up at the sky, where the sun was setting. There was no anger in his eyes, just a calmness, as if he understood that times had changed. Soft, emotional music played in the background, and the camera zoomed in on his face. He didn't smile, but a slight glint appeared in his eyes, perhaps of pride, perhaps of relief. In that moment, Tony Beets wasn't just a defeated father, but a legend who understood that every kingdom had an end. He had taught his son the ropes, but he hadn't imagined he would surpass him. Now the question swirled in his mind. Is it time to pass the baton? The cool Yukon breeze blew around him, and he sat there like a king knowing his kingdom was about to pass into new hands. The next day, the atmosphere at camp was different. Tony Beets hadn't said anything all night, but now his steps were back on the path where his son, Kevin, was working. Kevin was taking measurements with his team when he saw Tony's truck approaching in the distance. Everyone fell silent. Tony slowly dismounted, walked down the dirt path, and walked straight to Kevin. The two just stared at each other for a few moments, without speaking. An awkward silence hung in the air, but this time it wasn't one of anger, but one of understanding. Tony took a deep breath, extended his hand to Kevin, and said, "You did good, son." Hearing these words brought a slight smile to Kevin's face. He too held his father's hand, but his eyes were no longer filled with the fear they once had. There was confidence, pride, and even a touch of respect. Tony looked around, carefully observing the streaks of gold glistening in the dirt. His face held both pride and a hint of pain. He said, "You proved me wrong, but the very thing I gave my life for is in your hands today. So maybe I won, even though I lost." Kevin said, "I didn't try to take your place, Dad. I just wanted to prove that I'm your son." They stood there for a few moments without speaking, and in that silence, an old bond was rekindled. Crew was also emotional. It was the first time he'd seen Tony smile. But behind that smile, there was still a slight challenge, as if this agreement between them was temporary. Because in the world of the gold rush, rivalry never ends. The camera slowly pulls back. Tony and Kevin are standing together in one frame, and the sunlight shines on the gold on the ground behind. The narrator's voice rings out, "A new king has emerged in the world of the gold rush, Kevin Beets." Kevin's confident smile appears on the screen, and a freeze shot of Tony's deep gaze appears in the background. Those eyes say the story isn't over. There's still another season to go. The narrator's voice grows louder. Will Tony return? Will a new gold war begin within the Beets family? Some dramatic beats play, and the text on the screen reads, "To be continued." This is followed by the narrator's energetic line, "If you think Tony's still in the game, let us know in the comments. Like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because next season is going to be even crazier." The camera zooms out, the cool Yukon wind blows, and the sound of an excavator is heard in the background, as if the story isn't over, but about to begin again.